The knock that made me a millionaire sounded like a threat, three sharp raps on oak that ricocheted through the old house like a judge's gavel. I was still wearing yesterday's sweater, still smelling faintly of rosemary from the memorial wreaths, still convincing myself that grief was a room I could quietly tiptoe out of in the morning. I opened the door expecting another neighbor with a casserole and found a courier with a leather portfolio and a neat, expressionless face. He asked for my signature. When I scrawled my name, he handed me the envelope that would pour gasoline on 15 years of silence and light a match. Inside were the papers that said, in tidy legal font, that everything my aunt had built now belonged to me. The mansion with its stained glass windows, the gardens with their whispering birches, the majority stake in Wren and Hearth, the home design company she had coaxed from a single boutique to a chain that subtly influenced how half the city decorated their living rooms. More money than I could wrap my head around. And before midnight, the people who left me behind when I was 13 would come strolling up the front path as if the last decade and a half had been a nap. My name is Aria Linden. Yesterday, I was the woman folding thank you notes in a too-quiet parlor. Today, I am the heir my aunt chose, and in between those truths lies a story about what family means when blood is currency and love is proof of work. If you think money can't make ghosts knock on your door, wait until the will is read. I wasn't born into the red brick Victorian on Sycamore Hill. That came later, after the night my mother forgot to return from her walk to clear her head, after the morning my father's promises evaporated with the last unpaid bill. Before that, our lives fit into a two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat that steamed like a sauna in summer and rattled like a marching band in winter. My father worked at a rental car desk at the airport, pressing smiles into his cheeks the way you press pleats into trousers. My mother taught violin in the afternoons and collected fatigue like it was sheet music measure after measure of the same minor key. We were never destitute, not exactly, but everything we owned had a wobble in it. Furniture with one shorter leg. Plans that tilted when you touched them. When I was 8, my father discovered the kind of poker games that start as jokes and end as habits. He wasn't cruel. He was careless. He didn't rage. He vanished into smoky rooms and returned smelling like stale luck. My mother learned to calculate the weekend headaches. On the good days, she braided my hair and sang as she cooked. On the bad days, she drew the curtains at noon and spoke in whispers, as if being loud might shatter something neither of us could afford to replace. Looking back, the signs were folded into the everyday, the pawn tickets tucked into the fruit bowl, the way my father's laughter got brittle around the edges when rent was due, the stack of unopened envelopes with windows that showed angry red. Numbers. But children are loyal to the version of the world that feeds them breakfast. I was no different. The morning they left should have been ordinary. I overslept because my mother didn't tap my shoulder and say, "Up, bird." I tied my shoes in the kitchen because the living room heater had gone cold, planted my feet on the linoleum and noticed the quiet. Not a pause. The absence of footsteps. The apartment felt hollowed out, like a pumpkin after Halloween. The bedroom door always closed when my mother was sleeping off the bad days was ajar. Closets yawned emptily. There was a note on the table, written in my mother's tidy hand, a sentence that would script the next 15 years of my life. "Aria, we can't do this anymore. Your Aunt Cordelia will take care of you." It wasn't a goodbye. It was an instruction. I called my mother's number until my fingers cramped. The line rang into a tunnel and dropped me in the dark every time. My father's phone had already been cut off, the recorded woman cheerfully apologizing for the inconvenience. I sat on the edge of the couch and tried to feel like a girl in a movie who would soon be rescued, but there was no music swelling, only the rumble of dryers downstairs and the clink of coins in someone else's pocket. By afternoon, the landlord knocked and asked where the rent was. By evening, I had eaten crackers and peanut butter and lined up my school books as if neatness might conjure a parent. By the second night, I called the school counselor because I couldn't bear to hear the buzzer on the door and wonder if it was help or another demand. Whatever line the social worker tugged led, astonishingly, to my father's older sister Cordelia Wren, who might as well have lived on another planet. I'd met her twice at obligatory holidays when I was younger. Once she'd brought me a jigsaw puzzle of a famous painting and quizzed me on the artist. Once she'd snapped a napkin into a triangle and taught me which fork never touched salad. My father dismissed her as bossy and too in love with her own opinions. My mother invented headaches when she visited. To me, Cordelia had just been a woman with perfect posture and a wristwatch that looked like it ticked to a stricter time zone. Cordelia arrived the next morning in a charcoal suit and low heels that didn't make a sound on the cracked tile in our hallway. She surveyed the apartment the way an architect assesses a leaning wall and then turned that same cool gaze on me. "Pack only what you love," she said. "Love makes a thing worth carrying." That was how I left the old life, with a suitcase that held 2 pairs of jeans, a sweater that smelled like my mother's lilac lotion, a shoebox of photographs, and the stuffing of a girl whose parents had turned into theory. The social worker handled forms. Cordelia handled everything else. We walked past the laundromat's humming mouth out into a winter morning so bright it made the pavement look like glass. Cordelia's car was elegant but unshowy. The leather inside didn't squeak. She offered me water and silence in equal portions, and I sipped both as the city tilted into suburbs and then into the old neighborhood built when people gave houses names and porches faces. Cordelia's home was called Finch House, though somewhere along the line someone had attached a plaque that added, with unnecessary pride, 1894. It had 3 floors, 6 bedrooms, a turret that made the sunset look like an appointment on the horizon, and an entry hall that swallowed sound. The garden wrapped around the house in the way a shawl wraps around a woman who doesn't like drafts. It was both too much and exactly what I needed: the solidity of carved banisters under my palm, the whisper of rugs layered over original wood, the promise that, even if I cried, there was room for all that salt to go. Cordelia did not coo or fuss or make promises. She fed me dinner at a table that had seen a century of elbows, and then showed me a bedroom at the back of the 2nd floor, its wallpaper printed with climbing wisteria like purple notes on a stuff. "This is temporary until the court agrees on paperwork," she said. Temporary is sometimes the long way of saying forever, but we never assume. She told me where the bathroom was, where the towels lived, and that breakfast would be at 7 sharp. It sounded like a threat. Later I would learn it was a gift disguised as structure. Cordelia ran Wren and Hearth, a design company that achieved the impossible. It made tasteful money in a field often smudged with trendiness. What began as a single shop on a corner with excellent light had multiplied into stores with white walls and staff who could tell burl walnut from cherry by scent alone. She worked like a metronome. Everything in her world had its time and its place, and if there wasn't a place, she built one. Under her supervision, my life learned to stand up straight. It was not a fairy tale. It was better, a routine that didn't depend on luck. There were rules written into the air: no phones at the table, shoes off the rugs, homework at the desk. When you borrow a thing, replace it exactly where you found it. If you don't know, ask. If you fail, apologize to yourself first and then do it again. I failed a lot that first year, caught between wanting to rebel and wanting to see what happened if I didn't. I tested curfews, flung sarcasm, cried in the bathtub with the water loud so the tile wouldn't hear. Cordelia did not raise her voice. Consequences arrived like mail expected, stamped, never personal. If I was late to breakfast, the kitchen closed. If my grades dipped, she hired a tutor and canceled my weekend plans without flinching. "We do not hide from work," she would say, and I would grind my teeth and then grudgingly open my book. Yet all that iron had velvet stitched to the underside. When I had nightmares, she made tea and sat in the hall outside my room reading aloud from the newspaper because her voice sounded like a train schedule, reliable and dull enough to lull me back to sleep. When I bombed a geometry test, she said triangles have the decency to be consistent. Lucky for you, so am I, and then spent 2 hours on the floor with me, drawing angles until my brain clicked. She did not say she loved me. She showed up. The court hearings felt like someone else's drama performed in our names. My parents did not appear. Notices were mailed to the last address on file. They boomeranged back with undeliverable, stamped in tragic red. Social services recommended formal guardianship. The judge asked me directly if I wanted to remain with MS, Ren, and I said yes in a steady voice I had borrowed from her. Temporary became long-term. Long-term became the water we swam in. I learned to stop checking doorways as if a ghost might be waiting with apologies and instead memorized where the light switches were in a house with too many hallways. High school was a boot camp in being out of place and making peace with it. Cordelia enrolled me at Kingsley Academy, where the windows were taller than the first floor of our old apartment and the students wore uniforms that whispered instead of rustled. The first weeks were Vertigo A new language of privilege, a new ecosystem of alliances and dismissals. My public school had taught memorization. Kingsley taught synthesis. I flailed and then flailed less. I made exactly 2 friends at first day girl who loved physics and a boy who thought in essays, and together we studied in the library's old reading room until the librarian started leaving a bowl of mints by our table. By junior year, I wasn't embarrassed to raise my hand. By senior year, I knew how to pretend I belonged and sometimes even believed it. At home, Wren and Hearth soaked into my pores the way the smell of tung oil soaked into the floorboards. Summers, I interned at the distribution warehouse, learning the guts of the business inventory systems that chirped when you counted wrong, the muscle memory of lifting boxes with your legs. Cordelia made me rotate through departments. Purchasing, visual merchandising, accounting, which she called the Book of Truth. Once, after a long day tagging sofas, I asked her why she'd never had children. She took so long to answer I thought she hadn't heard me. "I never believed I had the softness required," she said finally. "Then you arrived, and I discovered softness is less about tone and more about process. You sand a surface enough, it takes finish beautifully." She smirked at her own metaphor and handed me a stack of invoices. College took me to the other side of the lake, far enough to feel alone, close enough to come home when homesickness made my bones ache. I studied marketing and operations because I liked the tidy way they braided numbers and human nature. On Sundays, I called Cordelia at 9 exactly. If I forgot, she waited 30 minutes and then called me. We traded weather updates, what are you reading recommendations, and practicalities. She sent care packages with tea, socks, and clippings from articles she thought I'd discuss with her later. In my dorm, I pinned Polaroids of Finch House to the corkboard like a talisman. The view from the turret at dusk, the kitchen island with its bruised marble, the threadbare runner on the back stairs she refused to replace because it has more stories than a new one could tell in 20 years. I was 26 and working as Wren and Hearth's youngest marketing director when Cordelia's body betrayed us both. It started quietly, a stiffness in her hands that made the pen slip, a fatigue she dismissed as aggravating. By the time the doctor said the word pancreas, the world had tilted at a degree we could no longer pretend was the floor. Cordelia took the diagnosis like an uninvited guest who must be seated, not indulged. "I will host it until I do not," she said. Treatment was brutal. Her hair thinned to a whisper. Food tasted like metals. But her schedule still kept its shape around the hospital's hours. She refused to let illness bully the clock. We slid into a new routine. I printed agendas larger so she could see them. I learned which days were good for decisions and which days were only good for compassion. She made lists and then lists for her lists. She taught me what she could before she couldn't. Signing authority. Vendor quirks. The percentage you can shave from a wholesale price if you talk about freight and smile. At night, when she slept and her breath rasped like paper, I wandered the house that had made me, touching the banister, the cool porcelain of a lamp she'd found at an estate sale, the window ledge in the library where my first C+ had made me cry. When she died, she did it the way she'd done everything, quietly, on her terms. I was in the chair by the window in her bedroom, the one that framed the crabapple tree. Dawn was a gray thought. Her hand loosened in mine, and then the room slammed with silence so absolute I thought the house had exhaled and refused to inhale again. Everything after that was choreography: the funeral with its spare eulogies, the lasagna brigade of neighbors, the stack of sympathy cards written in 3 kinds of careful handwriting. I wrote thank yous because thank yous are anchors. Then the courier knocked and set the next act in motion. Mr. Ezra Whitcomb had been Cordelia's attorney for longer than I'd known how to tie my shoes properly. His office sat in a brick building off the square, the kind of place with a brass directory that tells you time is a circle. I arrived early because it was something to do. He shook my hand in the way men of his generation shake hands, which is to say, like a deal was being made. His eyes, a pale blue that had faded at the edges like denim, softened when he looked at me. "She did a thorough job," he said. "That is both comfort and complication. I thought it would be just the two of us, plus perhaps a store manager or a charity Cordelia had secretly endowed. I thought wrong. When the door opened and a pair of silhouettes hesitated in the doorway, my brain refused to put names to them. Not because I didn't know them, but because the knowing had been embalmed so long it cracked when exposed to air. "Arya," my father said in a voice that had once called me kiddo and now sounded like a floorboard after a flood. His hair was thinner and grayer. His belly, a concession. My mother's mouth arranged itself into a smile that used to mean birthday, now meaning strategy. She wore a dress that wanted to be expensive. Her perfume hit my nose like a remembered argument. They moved like people who believed entrances carry weight. I stood because some reflex you can't scrub even with a decade of therapy tells you to rise. My mother hugged me with arms that trembled, whether from nerves or calculation I couldn't tell, and I held myself still the way you hold still for a blood draw. "Look at you," she said. "You're beautiful." My father's hand hovered near my shoulder and then dropped. "We've been keeping track from afar," he said. "We were thrilled when we read about your work at Cordy's company." My aunt had hated that nickname. I didn't ask how they'd found out about the will reading. Later, a neighbor would tell me my mother had clipped my aunt's obituary from the paper and carried it in her purse like a check waiting to be cashed. Mr. Whitcomb waited for them to sit. He inclined his head but did not introduce them. His professionalism shrugged on like a coat. "Let's begin," he said, opening a folder thick enough to deserve an adjective. MS. "Wren's will is straightforward in its intention, if complex in its structure," he read. The legal language turned on itself like a gear hereby and therefore and in the event. The gist was simple. The house, the capital accounts, the investment portfolio, her stake in Wren and Hearth, the art and the antiques, and the tea set that my hands knew how to wash by rote all of it came to me. There were bequests for the long-time staff, Mrs. Kersey, who had kept the house humming without fanfare, received a trust that would pay her a salary even if she never scrubbed another doorknob. Tomas Ibarra, the groundskeeper who could coax life out of Deadwood, received the guest cottage outright. There were gifts for the foundation that funded music programs in schools. But the engine of her estate, the thing that would keep generating weight and responsibility, landed in my lap. My parents didn't clap their hands in glee. They were more careful than that. My mother schooled her face into concern. "That is a tremendous burden for someone so young," she said, patting my knee like she had any right to my skin. "You're brilliant, of course, but the legalities alone dash." My father leaned forward, elbows on knees, performing sincerity. "Which is why we're here. To help. Technically speaking, as Arya's parents, we never relinquished our guardianship. We can step in to guide the transition. We've had experience managing complex situations." He said the last part as if staying one step ahead of a bill collector counted as corporate strategy. Mr. Whitcomb's mouth softened at the corners in a way I would later decode as entertainment held behind his teeth. "We'll address legal status in a follow-up meeting," he said mildly. "For today, it's enough to acknowledge MS, Wren's wishes. Tomorrow," my father said. "Tomorrow is better than a week from now. The sooner we formalize, the better for everyone." The meeting adjourned with handshakes they tried to make meaningful. In the hallway, my mother pulled a card from her purse and wrote their numbers in neat script on the back. "We're at the Sycamore Arms," she said. "We thought dinner tonight." "Just us. Catch up." "No lawyers." I said yes because I wanted to look whatever they were in the face. "No more half-dreams. No more practice conversations in the shower." I wanted facts that would either destroy me or finish the job of hardening the parts of me still rubbery with hope. They chose an Italian restaurant with soft lights and white tablecloths, the kind of place where the waiter says still or sparkling, like he's dealing playing cards. My father ordered wine before I sat down. Your mother loves Pinot, he said, as if invoking an old incantation might call the past to a heel. I asked for water. My mother tilted her head. You don't drink? Of course. You must be so careful with image now. The first 15 minutes were polite noise. Weather. Work. They asked about the company like tourists ask for directions, vaguely, with no intention of actually following them. I watched their faces the way you watch waves for signs of undertow. My mother's new lines were carefully arranged. My father's hands kept touching his fork and then withdrawing. Beneath the table, I pressed my palms together until my knuckles ached so I wouldn't reach for the old tether between us and tie it around my own throat. Eventually, my mother sighed the sigh of a woman carrying a narrative. We were not well, she said. When we left. I'm not excusing. I am explaining. Your father was in deep with men who had no patience for his luck. I was drowning in a sadness that felt like waking up in a well. We told ourselves you would be safer with Cordelia. We told ourselves she could give you what we couldn't. We were wrong to disappear. We know that. We've wanted to fix it for so long. We tried to reach out, my father said. But by then she'd built walls thicker than these. He knocked on the table as if Oak could be persuaded by knuckles. You had my address, I said. She never hid me. The house is in the phone directory. Shame flickered across my mother's face, then something harder. We were ashamed. And then the years piled up like snowdrifts. The longer we waited, the more impossible it felt. And yet you found your way to Mr. Wickham's office the minute Cordelia's obituary ran, I said, and remembered I was the daughter of a woman who had taught me the taste of structure. How convenient that grief is finally an invitation. The waiter arrived with bowls of pasta that steamed like fog and bought my parents time to recalibrate. My father twirled noodles with care, the way you move when you suspect you're being watched for evidence of character. We're not here to take anything from you, he said. We're here to make sure you don't drown in a tidal wave of paperwork. Estate taxes. Corporate governance. You'll need signatures. You'll need someone to handle the rental properties. We've learned a lot in the last few years about managing finances. Hard lessons. How much? I asked. He blinked. I'm sorry. At what point in this script do you ask me for money? I asked, voice steady. We can jump to that part to save time. My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. Aria. We're your parents. People love nouns when they've failed at verbs, I said. Be parents, then. Tell me the truth. They did. Or what they thought would pass as truth. Medical bills. A second mortgage. A business venture my father had started with a friend that just needed a bridge loan to get back on its feet. A number floated between us, round and insulting. 100,000. A number that would change everything. That's the price of forgiveness, I asked, or is that the down payment? My mother's eyes welled in the precise way they used to when she wanted the argument to end. Money doesn't buy forgiveness, she said. But it buys stability so we can mend what's left. If the money wasn't there, I said, gently enough to surprise myself, would you be sitting here? Silence. Not the thoughtful kind. The kind where gears turn behind faces and fail to catch. We parted under the awning while rain wrote its staccato script on the pavement. My mother hugged me again, whispering, think about family. My father pressed the crisp rectangle of his business card into my palme nothing gesture dressed as commerce, and then they walked away, shoulders pitched forward against the weather like they needed a reason to look burdened. Back at Finch House, I found a message on the landline from a woman named Sandra Kelly, who used to work at First Commonwealth Bank. She said she'd recognized my parents' names in the obituary notices and felt duty-bound to share some history if it would help me make good decisions. Bearer calls you return even when the hour is late. During that conversation, history rearranged itself in my head. Sandra spoke of loan applications with manufactured income, signatures that weren't a perfect match to driver's licenses, a man named Baxter who introduced desperate clients to solutions they paid for in future desperation. Your aunt stopped an ugly attempt once, Sandra said. You don't know me. This is my conscience. If they ask you for power of attorney, run. Sleep was not a friend that night. I went prowling. Cordelia's studies smelled like paper and lemon oil, and all the years between being saved and becoming solid. Her desk had a false bottom I'd never noticed. When I pressed what I thought was a decorative button, the panel popped. Inside was a folder labeled Lyndon in her impeccable hand. I pulled the history of my survival onto the blotter. Reports from a private investigator who had tracked my parents through motels and bad choices. Copies of emails my mother had nearly sent to my college address, spelling my name wrong in a way that made my heart fold, then unfold. A ledger of times my father had called the house looking for bridge loans until payday just to stay afloat. Receipts for security upgrades. A photograph of me at 16 grinning like the world was an open palm, paper-clipped to the back of an order form for my first winter coat. She'd bought me a note in the margin. She likes blue best. Tuck this away as insurance against forgetting. The bottom of the stack was a sealed envelope addressed to me. I recognized the stationery, the heavy cream paper Cordelia, reserved for letters she typed and then edited by hand. I didn't open it. Not yet. It felt like a parachute I might need, and you don't unwrap the parachute until you've decided how high you're willing to fall. The next afternoon, we reconvened with Mr. Wickham. My parents had found an attorney slicker briefcase who introduced himself as Mr. Adler and then launched into a speech about residual parental prerogatives and fiduciary oversight. Wickham listened with a face that had learned how to be neutral decades ago. He waited for the performance to end and then placed on the table a neat stack of documents tied with Cordelia's favorite navy ribbon. MS. Wren anticipated this conversation. He said softly. She asked me to walk through the facts. He started at the beginning, the legal one, not the storybook one. Temporary guardianship. Notices mailed and returned. An attorney named Barker, who had arrived years ago claiming to represent my parents' interests in accelerating a permanent solution, documents that bore their signatures consenting to transfer. Payments made the week after to a PO. Box my father had rented under an alias so paper wouldn't follow him home. An investigator's photographs. Affidavits. My chest tightened and loosened as Whitcomb arranged the evidence like a table set for a dinner no one wanted. Those signatures are dash, my father began, but Wickham slid forward printouts of emails Barker had sent bragging to a colleague about closing out the Lyndon situation and getting the old man to play ball. My mother reached for my father's wrist and squeezed hard enough to shade his skin. Wickham's voice warmed slightly, and there is this. He handed me the sealed envelope. She asked you to open it when you felt sturdy enough. I broke the seal because I was done being anyone's fragile. Cordelia's words were spare and sharp as a paper cut. My dearest Aria, I am writing you on a day when I am particularly annoyed by the frailties of the human body and particularly proud of the steel in your spine. If your parents have appeared, it is because money functions as a flare in the night for people who navigate only by greed. I do not say this to harden you, but to save you from doubting what you already know. She explained that when I turned 16, after the courts had tried and failed to coax my parents into responsibility, she had pursued adoption quietly, not as an erasure, but as an anchor. I did not tell you, she wrote, because I wanted you to choose me with your daily life, not resent me for the paperwork. You have been my daughter. Every morning you eat the breakfast I insist on. Every evening you come home to a place that knows your footsteps. The letter did what letters from the dead sometimes do best. It rearranged my grief so that underneath it, a floor revealed itself. Wickham read the formal adoption decree into the record like a prayer. My parents' attorney blanched. Well, he said too brightly, that changes the landscape. My father slumped, the composure leaking out of him the way air leaks from a tire you didn't know was punctured. My mother began the shaking shoulders cry that had gotten us out of ticket trouble once when I was 11. It worked then. It didn't move a single molecule in the room now. There was a second letter. This one was for leverage. Cordelia had left a conditional clause in her will. Any attempt by my biological parents to challenge the estate or the adoption would trigger a redirect of funds to a foundation she had set up for young people aging out of foster care. If greed is an excellent compass, she'd told Wickham, consequence is an even better map. The meeting was over. My parents stood not quite at the same time and not quite together, as if they had forgotten how to share rhythm. We'll be in touch, my father said, pushing anger through his teeth. Don't bother, I said, and heard Cordelia in my voice, the way she made boundary sound like etiquette. Wickham offered restraining orders. If they show up, he said, we will handle it. They showed up that night. The porch light was on a timer Tomas had set years ago when the neighborhood's main scandal was raccoons. The bell rang insistently. Their outlines through the beveled glass were smudges of impatience. I opened the door and stood in the threshold. You can't be here, I said. Papers are being filed. You think you can keep us from our child with some fancy letters? My father demanded. We created you. You started me, I said. Cordelia raised me. My mother pushed past the threshold as if it had been set for someone else. The foyer made her smaller. She looked around the way people look around a museum and want to touch. We just want to talk without that lawyer leering, she said. He doesn't know us. I know more than I want to, I said. 5 minutes. In the hall. Then you leave. My father took a step in, and the security camera on the ceiling near the cron molding blinked its small red eye like a wink. He glanced up and then tucked his chin, a boy caught with a hand in a jar. This is your aunt's poison, he said, jabbing a finger at the air as if Whitcomb were hiding behind it. She never liked me. She saved me, I offered. Bought me sneakers when the rubber on mine split. Sat through school plays so I had someone to smile at in the second row. Made me soup. Handed me tissues before I knew I'd need them. Paid for a dentist. Said no when I wanted the wrong yes. She didn't like what you did. She didn't need to like you to be correct. We were sick, my mother said. You don't throw sick people away. You do, if they keep pushing you over the railing and calling it affection, I said. You do as standing near them pulls you back into thinking you deserve less than a person who breeds deserves. The blue of a patrol car washed the foyer wall like a cheap club light. Whitcomb had texted the shift captain. This is not over, my father gritted, grabbing my forearm harder than the past hour warranted. The camera caught that too. It is, I said, pulling free. You just don't like the ending. Officer Hayes was polite to the point of theater. He asked them to step outside. He explained the incoming restraining order and how it would spray consequences if they didn't obey. My mother tried the tears on him. He admired the floors instead. They left with threats that tasted like pennies. The door closed with a click that sounded like certainty. After they drove away, Finch House felt both exhausted and lighter, like a person who has finally told the truth. I made tea the way Cordelia liked it 2 minutes, no more, and took the cup into the library because the couch there tolerated grief. I opened the second letter from the small wooden box on Cordelia's nightstand, the one I had found hours earlier and set aside because reading it before the confrontation felt like cheating. This one was not typed. Her handwriting leaned a little more to the right than usual, as if her body were ahead of her. Arya, I did not learn tenderness early. I mistook neatness for care, order for love. If I got anything right, it was letting you teach me the difference. You never owed me a daughter. You were one anyway. It ended with the word I'd wished for and taught myself to live without. She wrote it like a period. Love, Mom. The next months were not movie tidy. Restraining orders are paperwork that make paper promises. You still look over your shoulder sometimes. My parents tried once to sell a story to a local gossip site, and Wickham sent them a letter so dry it started a brush fire in the newsroom instead. Run and Hearth required not just my grief, but my confidence. I learned how to lean on our CFO without making leaning a habit. I kept the store's holiday windows from sliding into kitsch. I visited warehouses. I fired a manager who thought flirting with sales associates was motivational. I cried sometimes in my car. I took a weekend and painted the small back bedroom yellow because the old wallpaper had peeled in a pattern like a map of a country that no longer existed. The foundation Cordelia had seeded grew teeth. We rebranded it and widened its scope. The Wren Foundation began funding transitional housing.